fans, Robin here, back once more with a deck review for you. This week I'm going to be playing the Eyes of the Nine, and when I play the Eyes of the Nine this time, I'm going to try something a little different to the last time. I think possibly the best build for the Eyes of the Nine at the moment, or the best one I've managed to come up with, is with the Blue Horror, using him to gain extra glory with various keys and things, try and beef up his glory output because he's quite hard to kill, and I think he's very useful to do that with. So put a destiny to meet and keys and things on him, but I'm not trying to do that this time. I want to try something different. I've done that once and it worked out quite well. This time, a little bit of objective grabbing, and then with the thought of powering up Kacharik and to knock out my opponent. Now, I feel like other warbands possibly do this better. I also feel that the Eyes of the Nine are going to come into their own as more of the cards from Nightvault come out. I feel like there's going to be better spell cards for them. At the moment, the spell cards are quite weak. They've got some objectives which are really hard to score on the spell side of things. There's one if they cast 4 successful spells or something, which is very hard for them to cast at the moment. But we'll see as the game develops. I think they're going to turn into a bit of a powerhouse. At the moment, I feel like this powering up Kacharik sort of meta, if you like, isn't going to be as good as doing the same to Scritch or doing the same to one of the Reavers. But we'll see. So here's my deck then. Starting with my objectives, I've got Chosen Champion, again because the Blue Horror is actually pretty good for this, and I can still pile that on him, or Kacharik, depending on how it's going. Escalation, hoping to kill those objectives out on Chosen Champion. Escalation should follow along with it. Our Only Way Out, or Poor Man's Supremacy, as I like to call it. So that's worth 2 glory, and it's for getting 3 objectives. Shining Example, again an inspired leader. Shining Example then, so as alongside Kacharik, I'll be trying to inspire Vortimus. Vortimus is pretty useful. Inspired, he's got two dodges of acrobatic, pick up to 3 dodges. He's quite hard to kill as well. So I feel like Vortimus and Kacharik are going to be doing most of the heavy lifting in this battle. So that's why Shining Example's in there. Bind the City is a Eyes of the Nine specific Poor Man's Supremacy. Bind the City, so another 2 glory for getting 3 objectives. Dashed Hopes, killing an inspired opponent. That's in here. I don't know how great it's going to be, but Kacharik's going to be trying to knock out some opponents, and hopefully they'll be inspired when he does so. I haven't had masses of luck scoring Dashed Hopes, so we'll have to see how that goes. I must confess that was pretty much the last card that I put in. I've been struggling for scoreable glory with this deck, but anyway, Dashed Hopes is in there. Extreme Flank, I think this is pretty easy to score, especially with the possibility of popping up the Blue Horror on a flank. It's pretty easy to score for the Eyes of the Nine. Of course, it is a restricted card, one of my favourite restricted cards for this kind of warband, and the other one, Restricted Escalation, earlier was restricted. It's also one, possibly my favourite restricted card of all, normally in all my decks. Keep Them Guessing. Keep Them Guessing, again, I think is quite good to score with the Eyes of the Nine because you've got Vortimus's ability to bring out the Blue Horror. That's an action. And then you've got your attacks and moves and putting on guard and things. I think that's quite good to have in there, particularly if you can get it out first turn before you've got that Blue Horror on. After the Blue Horror's come out, it's a little trickier to score. Martyred, because there's some weaker elements to the Eyes of the Nine. I think Martyred is a good card to have. Possibly you could double it up with the one that you get glory if either Navia or Turosh are scored. I haven't got that in here this time, but Martyred is in here. That's a score immediately. Singled Out is basically Chosen Champion again, so doubling up there. I'm never quite sure whether doubling up is a good idea. Feels like it could be. Both come out first turn, not at all. Supremacy, so this is not Poor Man's Supremacy. Yeah, this is Supremacy. It's in a lot of decks, you know it. And finally, What Armor, another score immediately. If I get Cleave, which I'll be trying to do on various ways to get Cleave, to score What Armor, score immediately. It's quite easy to score, I think, that one. And then my Gambits moving on. Distraction. I'm in where the meta's shifted. I'm not sure quite where we're going, but I feel like now objective playing is much more part of the game. So Distraction's in there to try and move people off of objectives, and then maybe I can jump on an objective if I do that. Similarly, Earthquake. It's kind of counter any earthquakes that are in the deck, or to help score Supremacy potentially. Inspiration Strikes. I think it's a good card for the Eyes of the Nine. The Inspire mechanic for Kacharik and Vortimus is a little bit weak, so that beefs that up, having Inspiration Strikes in there. Interestingly, I think the inspired Kacharik isn't much better than not inspired Kacharik. And by having Awakened Weapon in the deck, which I do have, then you actually, it's the equivalent of inspiring him. So it's almost like, use that on Vortimus, put Awakened Weapon on Kacharik is a possible way to go for that. Ready for Action, one of my favourite cards, and that's another restricted card. Is in there too, and Spectral Wings, which I almost feel like is on its way to becoming the new go-to card for a lot of decks, and so you end up with this situation that we've talked about before, where you've restricted some cards and suddenly new cards come along which you want to have instead, and then do you restrict those? Who knows? Bound by Fate is in there. Bound by Fate basically enables you to choose 2 friendly fighters that win 3 hex division and switch their positions. Potentially useful for getting Kacharik in or somebody out, and then maybe shake them all about. I'll have to see. Stolen Fate. Stolen Fate is a card which basically enables you to re-roll a failed attack dice, and I think there's one of those cards for every warband. Centre of Attention, to try and bring people into Kacharik, or again it's useful for moving people off of objectives or into objectives if the positioning comes out right. Determined Effort, very useful for Kacharik. Similarly, Haymaker, +2 dice for the first activation, particularly useful at the end of a round when you can, because the negative effect only lasts to the end of the round, which is that you can no longer make defense dice rolls. But Haymaker is quite a useful card, I think. Sidestep in a objective grabbing meta. Sidestep is useful. Acrobatic, useful, very useful for Vortimus. Slightly useful for the Blue Horror maybe. But it's a good card to have in a Eyes of the Nine deck. Awakened Weapon, so it's going to put it on Kacharik. Total Offense, again I'm looking at getting this out for Kacharik, doubling those dice rolls. I've got Empowered Sorcery, +1 to all spell attacks, +1 damage to all spell attacks. Strength of Arrogance, +1 damage for Kacharik. So as you can see, Kacharik and Vortimus are going to be expected to do some damage in this game. Butcher's Eye, if I get a critical, then I have Cleave, which will help me score armour, and there's a bit of a multi-card need here, but with Haymaker or Total Offence, and get those in, then there's a good chance of scoring using Butcher's Eye to score armour. Champions, Fortitude. There's a reroll on defense dice, so it's kind of like Awakened Weapon but for defense, which could be very useful in this deck. FANEWAY Crystal, very useful for grabbing onto the objective, jumping on it from afar. That's why the FANEWAY Crystal's in there. Great Fortitude, +1 wounds, great strength, +1 damage. Again, useful for Kacharik to beef him up a little bit. And finally, the Potion of Rage is basically another source of 2 lots of dice to attack with. So that's the Potion of Rage. So Potion of Rage, Haymaker and Total Offence, all about maximising those attack dice. And we'll have to see how it goes. So that is the deck. So I feel that the eyes are a little bit weak at the moment, but that's a reasonable deck, I think. And I didn't want to use the Blue Horror meta, as I said at the top, so trying something different. I'm interested to see how these guys evolve. Really can't wait for the next bunch of cards to come out and see what we get if they boost the Eyes of the Nine. So you might see this deck evolving, this warband appearing a few times in the future as I try and evolve it into something powerful. I know it has one, possibly a Grand Clash somewhere along the line, certainly Glass along there somewhere. So obviously people are having success with the Eyes of the Nine. Let's see whether I do too in our next match. Until that match, I hope you're all enjoying your Shade Spiral. I hope you all had great Christmases and New Year. And until then, I will see you soon. Bye!